Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider podcast, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. My name's Perryn Keys. I'm the executive sports editor. I'm joined today by Wilson Alexander. He's our lead LSU football beat reporter, and by Scott Rabalais, our venerable longtime columnist. These two gentlemen, in similar fashion as LSU themselves, happy to probably get off the road. LSU's first 6 games, 4 of them were on the road. They're coming off, obviously, a 49-39 win over Missouri. So they survived another one. They played 6 games now. They're 4-2 overall, 2-1 in SEC play. And so now they head in the back half of their season, and five of the final 6 games are at home, beginning at 6 p.m. Saturday against Auburn. LSU's an 11-point favorite for this game. And it's worth noting probably that if you're an LSU fan, maybe don't get too comfortable with that 11-point line, because the LSU-Auburn series has been one of the wildest in all of the nation. So a little bit of food for thought as we get into it. We'll get to that in a bit. But first, gentlemen, welcome in.
Good morning, afternoon, whenever you're listening to us.
Good afternoon, good evening, good night. What did he say in the Truman Show?
Something to that like effect. We're not going to be quite that quick. We got a lot to get into. So, obviously, a bit of business here first. If you're listening, you probably know that the Advocate's always been the number one destination for LSU football coverage. This podcast is just another way for us to bring that great coverage to you. So, if you would. Find us on Apple Podcasts, find us on Spotify, or wherever other finer podcasts are found. And if you don't go that route, you can always check in with us on the Advocate's YouTube channels. And we're also usually live on Thursday afternoon on all of the Advocate's social channels. Of course, you can subscribe to the Advocate the old-fashioned way with our print edition, or you can subscribe digitally. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. And get a hold of our newsletter as well if you haven't already. Rab handles that 3 times a week personally, but it's a daily newsletter. You get all of the LSU headlines and great coverage from our crew delivered straight to your inbox. So to do that, to sign up, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. So, gentlemen, as we mentioned, we're at the halfway point of this season. Plenty to like and plenty to take quite a bit at issue with if you're an LSU fan. 'Tis the season, I suppose, if we're halfway through for midterm grades. And Rab, you had you handed out some midterm grades at theadvocate.com earlier this week in a column you posted. And the offense, as you might suspect, got high marks. Nobody got worse than a B. Quarterback's A+. I think that's certainly speaks for itself. Running backs got, if I'm not mistaken, a B-. O-line got a B. Am I getting that right? O-line?
Yep.
O-line, okay. But the defense, I mean, listen, I hate that we talk about the defense so much, but I mean, this is the thing that everybody seems to want to talk about and focus on, because, hey, that's the area obviously in most need of improvement if there is improvement to be made. Defensive line, you gave them a D. Secondary with a D-. Coaching got a C.
Overall coaching.
Yes. Walk us through those grades if you would.
Well, the offense has performed at a really high level. I mean, you can quibble a little bit here. Yeah, they give up, a fair number of sacks considering how mobile Jayden Daniels is, but his play has been excellent. The wide receivers, other than a few drops, have been excellent. You have 2, really dangerous threats now in Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. Speaking of midterm, I have to vote on the AP All-America mid-season team, and I think I'll put Malik Neighbors as 3 wide receiver spots. I think I've got to put him as one of the All-American wide receivers. So he's right up there at the top of the nation in terms of statistics, and Thomas has been great as well. Defensively, defensive line, and there was improvement in the Missouri game. There was some better plays by Mason Smith and some of the guys, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But overall, too many holes, not enough pressure on the quarterbacks. Linebackers have been meh, overall, okay. And the secondary, I'm sure people are saying, why not an F? And I understand that, but the whole Greg Brooks thing is a that factors in. I mean, they would be somewhat better if he was healthy and able to still play. So I think that's a little factor. And the C grades, great job on offense, not a great job on defense. The Harold Perkins wedded to the middle inside linebacker position. It's going to be a decision that rivals the drop linebacker position back in the late 90s when Lou Tepper was a defensive coordinator, and everybody's like, what is the drop linebacker and why doesn't it work? So a mixed bag, but I think about what you'd expect for LSU with the season they've had, 4-2, and with some good wins and some bad losses.
Well, I would have to check your head if you didn't put Malik Neighbors as a midseason All-American. There'd be something seriously
I know.
wrong.
I only qualify myself because journalistically, you're always like saying he's probably this or maybe that. You don't want to say definitely, but yeah, he's one of the three best receivers in the country.
At the end of the year, probably maybe you could qualify, but. The midseason point, definitely, and you can make an argument for Brian Thomas being one of those three as well. There's some other folks who would certainly have an argument, but I mean, Brian Thomas still leads the country, or tied for the country lead with 9 touchdown catches. He's in the top 10 receiving yards too. So receivers would definitely get an A plus. The play of some of those positions on offense, especially like Jayden Daniels, the receivers. I think if you said it was like maybe a B for the running backs, I'd give it an A because of Logan Diggs and what he's done. And then the offensive line, I'd probably give like an A-. I think they've been really strong. Yeah, they've given up some sacks, but sometimes that is on the quarterback, and they've looked really good. And so the offense, it reminds me of that scene in A Christmas Story with the teacher going A plus 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 for Ralphie, and they're having that dream about his his essay on the Red Ryder BB gun. And so that would be what I would do for the offense at this point.
See,
defensively, not so much.
I was going to say, well,
we want to
defensively,
inspire conversations. That's what we're doing.
Defensively, Wilson, is Rab being a mean teacher? Is he being up on the money? Is he being an easy grader? Where do you stand? How do you feel?
No, I think it's totally fair. I mean, he is spot on a lot of that. I mean, the defensive line in particular hasn't met expectations to this point. LSU was kind of hinging its hopes on that group being able to dominate up front. And with not just the defensive line, but really the front seven as a whole, because of Harold Perkins and him coming off of a fantastic freshman year, being considered possibly one of the best defensive players in the country. And you see it on tape, like there's plays that Harold makes that nobody else can make. Like there's still so much talent there. And that does just speak to maybe some misusage. LSU thinks that it has found a system and a formation, a scheme that's going to sort of help in a lot of these areas, which I think we'll probably get to with the 4 down front, and that kind of helping solidify what Harold's going to do. And maybe it will do some more of that moving forward. But defensively, you've been one of the worst defenses in the Power 5 all season. And so, yeah, you can't help but grade them very low at this point.
LSU 117th in the nation against the run, 5.04 yards per carry. 109th in the nation, 8.2 yards per pass attempt. 93rd in the nation, 1.83 sacks per game, which speaks to what you were going to allude to about the pass pressure just really not being there. Certainly not in the way they thought it would be. Speaking of the defense, since we're on the subject, there were a handful of other personnel changes. They've been tinkering pretty much since the season started, really since camp started. But there was certainly a couple of changes of note when LSU was up there in Columbia. We'll start with the corner position. Zy Alexander's pretty much been there from the start on one side. They have tinkered week after week after week with the opposite position. And on Saturday up in Columbia, they put Sage Ryan there. Walk us through what went behind that decision. Excuse me.
Zy, like you said, has locked down one side in terms of who's playing there.
Right.
Let's be very clear about what lockdown on one side means in this case. On the other side, LSU had Sage Ryan at the outside corner spot to start this season against Florida State. He was out there, and Brian Kelly said it had a lot to do with his tackling. That they felt better about his tackling. You've seen as the season gone on that tackling was very much a concern for this team. And it should be noted, it got a lot better against Missouri. LSU, this is by PFF's charts, only missed 3 tackles against Missouri. And they were all in the secondary. And so that was a massive improvement after missing by, again, this is PFF numbers, 17 the week before. And I keep using their numbers simply because for some consistency in terms of how it's being charted. But remember, LSU charted 34 missed tackles against Ole Miss. And a lot of that was happening in the back end. So and maybe in an effort to shore up some of those things, again, they think Sage Ryan is a better tackler than some of their other corners. He's out now on the edge there against Missouri. And, Sage, this is kind of interesting, really, when you think about the history of both of these corners, are not like career cornerbacks. Zai in high school did not play cornerback.
Yeah,
he was a
right.
quarterback. And I remember talking to him in the preseason. He said that he played a little bit of corner like very early in high school and then like didn't again until he got to Southeastern. And they kind of took a chance on him because of his athleticism. Sage has not played the boundary corner at LSU. I mean, he's a super athletic guy who played a ton of different kind of spots in high school at LCA.
He
but like
was recruited as an athlete. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was a great offensive player, returner, all these things. But outside corner was not something that he has a ton of experience doing. But LSU is putting him out there and trusting that he can go and do that. It's something that started in preseason camp, late, back half of the preseason. And they're going back to him. We've seen Denver Harris there with mixed results. He's given up some touchdowns and gotten beat over the top at times. And Deuce Chestnut is out right now and his status with the team is uncertain. J.K. Johnson is out probably for the year, with maybe in December, depending on what the situation is. Brian Kelly said, this a while ago that he can maybe get him back by then, but they don't have a lot of options. They're trying to improve the tackling, and they think fundamentally Sage is probably the best option right now.
You noted tackling improved, according to PFF, just sort of, but by the eyeball test, I would think that we would say that tackling improved up at Missouri. One of the ways that sort of, showed itself was just in the simple fact that, as we discussed over and over and over again on this show, that LSU was among the worst in the nation on third down. And now they're not best in the nation now, but against Missouri in the second half, they held Missouri to 207 on third down. So that was a noteworthy improvement. The other personnel move that LSU has experimented with on defense, they went from an odd man front now to a 4-man front. And that enabled the staff probably to do a little bit more with Harold Perkins, as you say. Why is this a better move? Is this something we're going to see probably now from here until the end of the season? And if so, it's easy to say this now, but why did it take so long for them to arrive at this decision?
I'll start with maybe sort of the nitty gritty of it, and maybe Rad can then touch on kind of like the why this took so long and what it means part of it. It's interesting because when you look just the naked eye at what LSU is doing defensively in Missouri compared to Ole Miss, you're looking at something that looks almost sort of similar in that you've got 3 linemen with their hand in the dirt and then a stand-up jack edge rusher on one end. That looks the same as maybe a 3-4. LSU's calling this a 4-down front. Jacoby and Guillory explained this during player interviews the other day, and Sage Ryan sort of mentioned it as well, was that it's now that the jack linebacker is rushing a lot more. And so now you're rushing 4 kind of as your base a lot more instead of maybe rushing 3. There's still going to be tweaks to that formation, play dependent stuff where LSU will, maybe even bring 5, but it'll sometimes just bring 3. But they're talking about this in a way that it is settled that they're going to do the 4-down front moving forward. This sort of corresponded with Pete Jenkins coming in. These defensive linemen have been getting a lot more technique work over the last week and a half, 2 weeks since he came. Jacobian talked about some new drills that they've implemented to try to get the most out of this defensive line. It was also interesting to be noted within this 4-down front, LSU did some interesting things against Missouri with moving Mason Smith out to defensive end. Early in the season, he'd been playing a lot of 2 technique, which is very defensive tackle, not quite nose guard over the center, but very far inside and having to eat up blocks. They were moving those guys around a lot more, putting them in some interesting places. Jacobian said the purpose was to basically get them one-on-one matchups. And so it was effective at times in the second half against Missouri.
Sure.
They had 2 sacks in the second half and came up in some big moments with that and didn't even have to bring pressure at times. One sequence in particular, right after Jayden Daniels got hurt, Missouri gets the ball back. LSU has missed the field goal that went just directly over the upright. And it's LSU still losing at this point, has to make a stop. I think it was 32-27 at this point. Jacobian flushes out Brady Cook, and Harold Perkins knocks away his throw. Then Harold makes a tackle for loss in the flat, and then Mason Smith sacks Brady Cook, his first sack of the season, on third down to force what was the first 3 and out of the game for LSU's defense. In none of those spots did LSU bring pressure. It sent 4 every single time. And so that's kind of what they want to kind of be able to keep doing moving forward. Like we said, there'll be some variation in that, but they're hoping with that 4-down front, be able to send 4, that can be effective. That's what it looks like the strategy was against Missouri and probably will generally continue to be overarching moving forward.
LSU with 2 sacks, if I'm not mistaken, 3 hurries, and then they knocked down 2 passes at the line of scrimmage. Much has been made, understandably so, because his name is certainly very well known and has been for the better part of 40 years here in Baton Rouge. Much has been made of the addition of Pete Jenkins. Rab, how much was directly attributable to him? And then also, how much difference can he make realistically now with basically 6 weeks to go? How much in-season improvement work can he do and can the staff do?
Yeah, Brian Kelly, gave him some credit for helping the effort. I mean, he's not the defensive line coach.
Correct.
Let's make that clear. He's an analyst, which means he's more of a advisory, helping shape the game plan, kind of mode. But he's very good at teaching technique, and he's very good. That's what he's known for. He's taught a lot of other defensive line coaches, the techniques that they're supposed to. Jimmy Lindsey, LSU's initial line coach, who's been out all year because he fell ill in August, is a Pete Jenkins disciple. Ed Orgeron brought him in to be his D-line coach when he became the interim head coach in 2016 for Les Miles, and that was actually a position. But can he help? We've been hearing all year about pad level and technical issues with the defensive line and being too far, not crowding the line enough, being starting too far off the line of scrimmage at the snap of the ball. And I heard, if I may, T-Bob Hebert, who played center at LSU, said, I loved when players gave me more room. Sure. It allowed me to snap the ball, get my other hand up, get ready. You have more time to get your hands in position to make the block. And they're trying to put a little more put a little more pressure on the offensive line to react more quickly. So it's those kind of things. He can make an impact. Is it going to be a wholesale change? Are they going to start limiting teams to like 28 yards a game rushing, and have 5 sacks a game? No, probably not. As we've discussed on this podcast and in our coverage, they are largely the team they're going to be on defense. But he is a help, and Brian Kelly was rather candid, saying, I wish I'd done this sooner than bringing him in last week.
Right.
To follow up on just a couple of those things, particularly the alignment piece, because Jacoby and Guillory had some interesting things to say about all that, there's been a lot made up about that, especially against Ole Miss. LSU was like 1.5 yards off the ball at times, and it was just bizarre because then they were having to kind of catch everything instead of dictate, which is what you want to do as a defensive line. Jacoby said that this was intentional at one point, was to play a little bit off in order to be able to react and use your eyes, but that they had just gotten way too far off the ball. And it is sort of astonishing that nobody noticed that sooner. But he said that one of the first things Pete Jenkins did was come in and say, no, we're getting you back further up in the line of scrimmage. You could see that against Missouri, and that they were able to attack much better and just trust their eyes instead of having to sort of react to things. Because when you're reacting as a defensive player, that's when you're in trouble. Right. And so they were able to get after it a little bit better and make some improvement, and we'll see how much it really pays off.
I've always been kind of more of a 4-3 guy than a 3-4, and I like the fact that, as Wilson said, it gives them some options. 3 down linemen and maybe one guy standing up, or you can rush 3 or rush 5. I don't know. It just puts you in a position right in the middle of all those things, the different alignments, to be multiple and to give the offensive line different looks. And some guys are better it sounds amazing, a defensive lineman is a defensive lineman, but some guys are better at different techniques, lining up in this gap or right over the center, and then sometimes they're not as good. So hopefully for LSU's perspective, that they're using these guys' best talents as defensive linemen in these formations now.
I would say, now this is me speaking, but I would say the whole idea behind all of this is you understand that these guys aren't going to be the 85 Bears. The idea is just get the defense to the point where where you feel confident that they're going to make 5, 6, maybe 7 stops on a good day, and that should be enough for what is now sort of it's coming to focus that this is, to this point, the second best offense that LSU has ever had. So do enough to make your offense feel like, well, okay, we don't have to score every single time we're out there. Give us a fighting chance, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. This is the LSU Sports Insider podcast, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. You know where to find all our writers' great work. That's at theadvocate.com. Again, to subscribe, whether it's print or digital, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. And also, if you want to get a hold of our newsletter, please do so. Please sign up for it. You can do that at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We're obviously, speaking of the offense, we're going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about the one and only Jayden Daniels, who's having quite the year. What else can you say about the guy? That was as gritty a performance as you, I think, I'll put it to you. Was that one of the grittiest performances I would think you have seen somebody have in an LSU uniform? Go ahead. Give us your 2 cents on that before we get on to Heisman and what he may have to do to get back in the Heisman race.
Well, it reminded me a little bit of what happened the last time LSU was at Missouri in 2020 when Miles Brennan suffered that freakish abdominal muscle injury, and he kept playing and played very well. And then, of course, he was never the same quarterback again. But Jayden got hit in the back. He scored a touchdown run that was nullified by a penalty, and he kind of stood up, and he got nailed in the back. And then he scored on another touchdown run. Dare I say a Heisman kind of play, but 3rd and 3 from the 35, and he takes off running, and he went down in the end zone.
Wilson just gave you the side eye on that one.
You gotta. I'm just saying the kind of play you gotta capture the voters' imagination.
Absolutely.
With.
I just don't think we're quite at Heisman moment
Okay,
yet.
well, but I'm
to
saying
that
someone
point-
could look back on it and see that's a big play.
Absolutely.
But he's he's not real thick guy. He's kind of willowy, looking Jayden Daniels, and very tall and thin. And you of course we've said all year. Everybody said slide Jayden slide. Maybe we need to come up with a poem or something. Slide Jayden slide, but. But he kept coming back for more, and taking a shot in the ribs is difficult. Watching the game replay, Robert Griffin III, who did the game, of course, on the Heisman at Baylor, said it affects your rotation. Shot in the ribs. Being able to try to throw accurately in the game. And
if you've ever had a rib injury, it hurts to breathe in some cases.
Yeah.
It hurts to sneeze. It hurts to all that stuff. Much less try to twist your hips and throw and all that.
You could see Jayden trying to work on that very thing on the sideline, just throwing and rotating and sort of loosening himself back up right after that happened. Yeah.
Not only has he displayed great talent this year, and he's grown a lot as a quarterback in the time we've seen him at LSU, but that kind of thing is an inspiration to the rest of the team. Mm-hmm. And I think back to Joe Burrow on that blindside hit in the Fiesta Bowl, and then coming back and leading him on a touchdown, throwing a touchdown pass on the next possession. I remember saying after the game, Jamar Chase after the game said, "Joe Burrow is tough as hell." And I think no one said that, but you could just about you could hear that in the words of some of the LSU players talking about Jayden after the game. It was quite a performance.
And to add a couple of things, I don't know if we've already touched about this before, but it wasn't the ribs was the big thing, but it wasn't just that. He had a scrape on his cheek, or a cut on his cheek, a scrape on his neck. His left hand was swollen. I think it maybe had gotten stepped on or something at some point because it was swollen. He had tape all over after the game. He had a big gash on his forearm that he had to get taped up. He had just so many little nicks and other things going on. It wasn't just the ribs, even though the ribs was the big thing. He played through a ton in this game.
That was a feisty game. Somewhat surprisingly for LSU, Missouri, two teams that don't really have much of a history together. One thing you mentioned, Rab, about this gutty performance, he put everything on there in terms of a highlight reel that you'd ever hope to have. I wonder, just in terms of the sort of the campaign and how many people are watching, it's unfortunate that he was in the 11 o'clock window while OU Texas was going on. You're not entirely sure how many people would have seen that because, the Heisman race is very much an inexact science. You never know exactly what the voters are going to go for, and you don't know how closely they're paying attention to a Michael Penix over here and a Caleb Williams over there and a Bo Nix over there and all that other kind of stuff, and just how closely they're looking. But he is tied for the ninth shortest odds right now at plus 2,200. His numbers would suggest that maybe he ought to be higher. Game-winning drive first and foremost, but second in the nation in passing, 10.9 yards per attempt. Michael Penix has 30 more yards passing than Daniels does at this point. But Michael Penix has 9 yards rushing, and Jayden Daniels has something like 422. He's the proverbial straw that stirs the drink. What you mentioned this before, but what are some of the headwinds that Jayden would be facing if he and what could he do to get himself back into the race for real?
Well, she's going to have to keep winning, and he's going to have a big moment
Yes.
probably in the Alabama game on November 4th, I think is the day of the game. And just keep doing what he's doing. I mean, his stats say he's one of the top two or three quarterbacks in the country, which is where he started the season. You know, I think we're all a little surprised to see the preseason Heisman odds, and he was second favorite behind Caleb Williams, who, of course, won last year at USC and is back and is playing very well again. Penix is now the odds on the consensus odds on favorite right now, but he's just gonna have to keep playing and keep, you know, there probably gonna be more people say I need to check him out again, because the one time everyone definitely saw him was the Florida State game, because that was a primetime game on Sunday night and there were no other games on, and that was the game to watch of the whole weekend, and he had over 400 yards total offense, but he threw one touchdown late to Brian Thomas. It was a cosmetic touchdown. He had an interception that really kind of sealed LSU's fate. And I would imagine some voters kind of made up their mind about him then and kind of moved on. And there's also the whole Joe Burrow factor. If LSU plays, if they don't go to the SEC championship game or the playoff, they're going to play 13 games this year with a bowl. He's going to wind up with he's on pace for almost 5,200 yards total offense and 50 touchdowns total, rushing and passing. Joe had 6,000 total yards in 15 games and 65 touchdowns, which, you know, unfairly, voters are saying in the back of their minds, well, he's not Joe Burrow. So if he's not as good as Joe Burrow, how can he be the best player in the country? It's people watching this podcast or read my column in Thursday's paper, like, it doesn't make any sense. It's an emotional vote. You don't have finalists. They don't say, here's your, like, I vote for the Wooden Award in basketball, and at the end they give you 10 people, pick from these 10 and rank them in order, and then, you know, from that they compile all the votes and they decide who wins the Wooden Award. In the Heisman,
you can pick anybody.
In the Heisman, you can literally pick anybody. As I pointed out, I can pick anybody who plays in college. I can pick the backup left guard who plays at Georgia Tech or at Sam Houston State or something like that. Anybody. And it doesn't have to be division. It doesn't have to be FBS. It doesn't.
Yeah, that's right.
I always say I didn't have a vote then, but I would have voted for Steve McNair at Alcorn State.
1994. Absolutely.
Because he was tremendous. So it's very broadly open to interpretation. People talk about being a Heisman finalist. The Heisman finalists are only determined by the final voting. They take the top 4 vote getters and they invite them to New York. So Jayden at least deserves that, in my opinion. Certainly the way he's played, and if he plays the second half of the year like he did the first half, he at least deserves that. But it's a very broad, it's the beauty and the curse of the Heisman Trophy, in that every voter, the three of us have Heisman votes. We all have a little different view of, I think, if we sat down and talked about it, of what is important to us in terms of a Heisman candidate, and that's and there's 900 something of us around the country.
To your point, I can't remember. This must have been the year before last. I thought Aiden Hutchinson, the defensive end from Michigan, was the best player in the nation 2 years ago. He's the best player in the nation. That's what we're voting on, so I voted for him. It's exceedingly rare that something like that happens, though. It's almost always, certainly the past 30 years, quarterback has got seemingly a much easier path to the Heisman Trophy. And one of the other things in this race to consider in terms of, well, hey, how come Jayden Daniels isn't higher in the race? For whatever reason, fair or not, good or bad, up or down, the fact of the matter is it sure helps. It gives you a huge boost if you are still in contention for the national title race. You sort of, again, fair or not, you sort of get somewhat disqualified almost in the minds of voters if you're not somewhere up there in the top 5 of the nation, Wilson.
And one other thing just to kind of keep track of as we go through the rest of this back half of the season is that this is a really strong year for quarterbacks across the country. So it's not just that Jayden's putting up all these numbers. He's fighting, like, his numbers are being compared to Michael Penix and Bo Nix and Caleb Williams and now Dylan Gabriel at Oklahoma. And Drake May, exactly. And so it was interesting, like, seeing even some graphics that were made for games that, like USC, Arizona. It was like a top 5 Heisman people. And this was, of course, probably made earlier in the day before Jayden did what he did against Missouri. But, like, it had Dylan Gabriel on there and didn't have Jayden. It had Bo Nix on there, didn't have Jayden. And, so he's getting that attention and getting that talk, but he just has to maintain the play. So, and then, like, we're talking about, like, Oregon and Washington play this weekend. Bo
That's
Nix
right.
and Michael Penix go up against each other. One of them is going to have to probably make a play to win that game, and then the one who doesn't is probably going to then kind of fade out of the Heisman race. And so as long as Jayden keeps doing that, like you said, having a game like a big game against Alabama, then he's going to have a very good chance to get to New York.
Yes, and the overwhelming likelihood is that whoever loses, again, fair or not, whoever loses that Washington-Oregon game, the quarterback of the losing team, finds himself, even if he had thrown for 471 yards and 4 touchdowns and run for 115 and another touchdown, it's just sort of the way this works. It's, you can call it a popularity contest, and that's not fair, but we've seen this over and over again. There's something to this for whatever reason.
There's a funny thing with Jayden's situation, though. LSU's record is an anchor on his Heisman hopes. However, because they've been in every game but one, but two, has been a shootout kind of game, or a game where he's got to keep playing, it's allowed him to have better stats than if he was coming out at the end of the third quarter like he did against Grambling.
He didn't play the second half against Grambling.
Yes, he didn't play the whole second half. So that's been very rare for Jayden this year.
To your point, though, the fact that they're 4-2 and maybe not 3-3 or even 2.
Well, that's huge.
Yeah. It's a direct result of his sterling play that he's put on display. You mentioned Penix and Nix, who will, one of them may very well seriously knock the other out of the contention. And speaking of Nix, former Auburn quarterback, and Auburn's coming in this week. He and his dad actually both were quarterbacks in this LSU-Auburn series. So this is not a vintage Auburn team by any stretch. Hugh Freeze is in his first year. They got rid of Brian Harsin. He never really seemed to fit. He certainly wasn't embraced by the Auburn fan base. Freeze is going to be embraced for as long as he's winning, I think, or is putting the program on the path to winning. Certainly, he may not be Citizen of the Year, but I think we all think he's a pretty good football coach.
He gets a pass from the Auburn fans this year, and that's it. Next year, you got to win, baby.
Well, they're struggling on offense this year, and I don't think anybody's necessarily holding that against him because he's playing with what he's got. They're 13th in the SEC in total offense, 358 yards per game, dead last in the SEC in passing, 156 yards per game. They do run the ball pretty well. They're third in the SEC in rushing yards per game at 202. And they do get production of the quarterbacks in the run game. Peyton Thorne, the transfer from Michigan State, he's had about 130 some odd yards rushing, as has Robbie Ashford, who is the backup, who kind of comes in and down and distance situations and things like that. Again, not necessarily a vintage Auburn team, as we discussed at the top of this podcast. You dismiss Auburn if you're LSU in particular. You dismiss Auburn at your own peril. How concerned? I'll start with you, Wilson. How concerned should LSU be about this team?
I'd say maybe fairly so. I was more concerned about Missouri because of the weapons that they had on the outside, and we saw going into that Florida State game like that. Oh boy, Florida State's got these weapons on the outside, and obviously that came to pass, quite literally. The Auburn, though, it doesn't have that kind of receiver, that sort of threat at all. And so it's really just a level of concern of if LSU isn't able to stop the run, which it hasn't always been able to this season. I think you mentioned, 5.4, allowing 5.4 yards a carry or something like that?
5.04. Yeah.
5.04, thank you. That is probably where I would feel concerned. The other thing is that this is the best defense that LSU has probably played this season. Florida State had some good pieces, but in terms of all the statistical stuff right now, halfway through the year, Auburn defensively is going to be the best team that LSU has played. I think it certainly helps that this game is at home. You don't have to deal with Jordan Hare, because one of the things that when you look at Auburn, what they've done so far is they played number 1 Georgia really, really tight. That game went down, toward the fourth quarter. Georgia finally pulled away in it, but it was a situation where Auburn was keeping that thing really close. And part of that, though, is it's at home in Jordan Hare. And so LSU doesn't have to deal with that. It's got its home atmosphere behind it for the first time in a while here. And so that's helpful. But because of what Auburn can do defensively, it's really going to be really, really physical. And because of its ability to run the football, it's a mid-level of concern going into this game if LSU isn't able to kind of do what it needs to in order to counteract those things that Auburn does well.
Auburn has averaged, the Auburn defense has averaged about 18.0 points per game, right around there, about 18 points per game, 91 points total over 5 games. That's noteworthy. As Wilson mentioned, it was that game against Georgia Auburn, incidentally, is coming off an open week, so their most recent game was against Georgia, and they gave them fits. They gave them all they wanted. It was a 20-20 tie until about 3 minutes left when Georgia went in and scored the go-ahead touchdown. And at that point, well, not at that point, but Auburn finished with 88 yards passing. And again, you mentioned that was at Jordan-Hare. Auburn is on the road. They played 3 road games this year. On the road, they're averaging something like 75 yards passing per game. So it's very much a case of, number one, can the LSU defense, stay disciplined with its run fits and tackle, as they did a better job of against Missouri. And then also, is LSU prone to giving up far too many big plays, or does the Auburn defense sort of slow these guys down? Rab, what do you see happening in a game like this?
Well, in terms of Auburn's passing game and LSU's pass defense, this is really the resistible force against the movable object, isn't it? They haven't thrown for 100 yards against an FBS team yet this year. Mm-hmm. If that's a prop bet in Vegas, I'm taking that bet that they
think they're going to break 100 against LSU.
Yeah, they're going to break 100 against LSU. Clearly, though, as Wilson said, they play good defense. You have to believe their MO is they're going to try to shorten the game, run the ball effectively. Missouri's running back, the name escapes me, but he had a 100-yard rushing game and 3 touchdowns Saturday as well. So, and not the best running back in the SEC, but it's something that's where LSU's got to show some improvement in this game, because the run pass threat from the quarterbacks has given them trouble this year, and allowing those big running lanes. Another reason that the defensive line, play, needs to be improved, and you would think they make improvement from to the second week under Pete Jenkins, but it's I would be surprised if Auburn doesn't try to muddy it up and make LSU have less time to do its thing on offense. But and it's also the LSU Auburn game, right? I mean, you almost expect a plague of locusts during the game or something.
I was going to get to that next, but go ahead. Yeah.
It's always something strange. This rivalry as an annual rivalry is coming to an end this year because of the new SEC schedule format with Texas and Oklahoma joining the league. I know we've talked about this before, but this is another one of those games that is impacted, and it's a shame because it's certainly, you can argue, it's been the most entertaining LSU rivalry that they play.
I was going to, Rab, you've been covering LSU football for 32 years, probably watching it before then even. These teams did not used to play annually.
That's right.
Until 1992.
They rarely played.
When the league expanded to 12 teams, went to 2 divisions, and now they're SEC West rivals. I was just going to ask you, in a wild series, among the very wildest in college football nationwide, when I say LSU Auburn, there's plenty to choose from. But when I say LSU Auburn, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
That barn burning in 1996 in Auburn. The old gym. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Behind, we were on the press box is usually on the west side of the stadium. Now at Auburn, it's in the end zone. Small complaint. And that was on the other side. And the upper decks at Jordan-Hare roughly as high as the upper decks at LSU, and the flames were that high, as high as the upper deck at Auburn. And of course, they blamed LSU fans for tailgating and barbecuing too close to the old tinderbox gym and setting it on fire. And that was. I mean, I've never been anything like that. Fortunately, I still say fortunately, the wind carried the smoke away from the stadium instead of into it, because that could have been bad. But I mean, I was at the earthquake game in 1988 when Tommy Hudson threw the pass to Eddie Fuller, working for the Reveille, the LSU paper, and of course the game was on the seismograph. I was at the interception game when Jamie Howard threw all the interceptions. The next year they carry him off the field, on the players' shoulders.
That was the bring back the magic game.
The cigar game when the Auburn players smoked cigars on the Eye of the Tiger, which some LSU fans have never forgiven Auburn for, and even things beyond their control. This was the game that got postponed because of 9/11.
That's right.
They moved. They moved the game to the end of the season, and moved back the SEC championship game a week. The LSU Tennessee SEC championship game was played the second Saturday in December that year because of that.
And the week before, what had happened because of those postponed games, that actually wound up being. I mean, it wound up being a Final Four in the SEC because on the other side that was Tennessee playing at Florida, which, if you remember, that was. Rex Grossman should not be the first name that comes to mind from that team. He had a hell of a year, I got to say. But that was for my money, that was one of Steve Spurrier's best teams at Florida. I was just so sure they were going to run through everybody. Tennessee went down in there and upset them. I think it was Travis Stevens, who was the running back, who kind of carried him over the edge at the end, carried Tennessee over the edge at the end. But that was sort of the upshot of the schedule having to be moved around, was that you had these two great games on either side. And that was that the Damon Duval game where the band was out on the field and Damon Duval, the Auburn kicker, gets caught up and he starts shoving these guys around. It's just only LSU-Auburn. It's just these weird things that happen.
Weird things. So it would be a shame if something weird didn't happen in this game. The last when they finally end the annual rivalry. You know?
I actually had a memory that I wanted to share. This is very odd, but at the time I was at a newspaper in Texas. I was covering the Houston Astros, who were in the World Series in 2005. There was and people have sort of forgotten about this. I kind of sort of forgot about this. And again, this is probably not even on the top 5 of crazy LSU Auburn games, but that was the game. It must have been at Tiger Stadium, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rab, where the Auburn kicker, whose name escapes me, missed 5 field goals in the same game. That was sort of the early days of getting texts on your phone. And I remember covering the World Series game. I'm got my mind completely on this World Series game. And I have a friend of mine who was an LSU fan who was texting me, the Auburn kicker just missed it. He missed another field goal. And then I got another text. He missed another field goal. And I got another text. I was like, well, the same text, I'm in a crowd or something. Right. These messages are weird going through. I'm just
getting the same one over and over
again.
LSU kicked a field goal and he missed and LSU won.
I thought I was getting the same text from my buddy just over and over. No, come to find out, the Auburn kicker actually missed that many field goals. So it's been a while. The interception game, as you mentioned, I wrote down that in 2000, it wasn't a marquee game in terms of games you're going to remember out of this series, but Josh Booty hit Josh Reed with a couple of long bombs, and then there's a guy named Tim Carter. Don't ask me why I remember this stuff in particular, but Tim Carter, the kick returner for Auburn, ran one back 100 yards, and that was kind of the backbreaker. But then just for fun, because Tommy Tuberville liked to do this stuff, that was the year they had Rudy Johnson, and Rudy Johnson really kind of exploded onto the scene. And they had a chance to take a knee inside of the LSU 10, and they decided, well, we're just going to go on ahead and punch one in just for fun. They got away with it. Mario Cristobal did not.
Right.
So anyway, we'll before we put you on the spot with a prediction, each of you gentlemen, I will just say, and we've discussed this a little bit here and there, but what's the number one thing LSU needs to do, as it gets set to tangle with Auburn?
I would say, run defense. I mean, if Auburn can't run the ball effectively, if they can't have, and I mean really effectively, play close to 200 yards rushing in this game, then LSU's almost certainly going to win, barring a bunch of turnovers. So they've got to finally bring it, and you have to, like I said, don't hold them I'm not talking about holding them to 18 yards rushing, but hold them down to a reasonable amount. If Auburn can't rely on the run and shorten the game, then I don't think they have much chance to come into Tiger Stadium and get a win.
Wilson? Mine would be very similar to that. I'll just sort of build off of that and say match physicality. Mm-hmm. Auburn has shown itself to be quite physical, especially on its own defensive side. If LSU is going to continue to do what it has offensively and be able to really just outscore Auburn kind of regardless of what's happening on the defensive side, it needs to be able to match that physicality, establish the run early, because even if it can do that, it's going to have a good chance of success, be able to maximize all of its possessions, because if Auburn is able to run the football and LSU isn't doing a good job of stopping it, then there's a good chance that LSU won't have as many possessions as it usually does. So I would still say Rab, but maybe building on top of that, just matching Auburn's physicality, that's probably going to bring to this game, especially coming off a bye week. They'll probably have some wrinkles.
They should be a little rested. Yeah, and that's right. They've had a little more time to work on this. We're all sort of saying the same variations of the same thing, I think, but my thing would be tackling. Just make sure, if you've got a chance to bring down a ball carrier, bring them down. Missed tackles are what seems to get the LSU defense in the most trouble. Making sure you get off the field on third down, crucial to that whole element is making sure that you actually wrap up, bring the guy down. That and just, certainly doing what you're supposed to do, what we expect the LSU offense to do as well. So LSU opened up as an 11.5 point favorite, excuse me. It's been steady at 11 for most of this week. The over-under is 61, which is slightly down from the past couple of weeks, which I would attribute to Auburn's lack of offense going into this game. Anyway, long story short, what happened Saturday, Rab?
I think it's one of those games that's close in the first half, and LSU gets the offense going in the second half, and Auburn does okay, but a lot of their drives stall out. They settle for field goals and make a few this time. But I've got LSU covering. I said 34-16 is my score. But with something crazy happening, like the scoreboard's going out, or something strange.
All the lights turn off.
Yeah,
Why not? Yeah, this is not an LED show.
something strange happening. But it's a. Auburn gives LSU a decent game for a while, but this is a hard game to win for Auburn on the road.
Wilson?
I see it be. I don't think LSU covers. The way Auburn's games have gone so far, it's been able to keep things close, like we said in that Georgia game. This is obviously this is the best offense that Auburn has played, and it's the best defense that LSU has played. And I just sort of feel like that's going to kind of sort of meet in the middle a little bit. And that's the only reason I think LSU maybe doesn't cover, but that it still wins without too much concern maybe by the end. So I think I said something like LSU 38, Auburn 28, or maybe like LSU 34, Auburn 24 kind of thing, like barely not quite covering, but being able to do enough to win the game.
So is this the rare occasion where the under hits on a game like this, based on what you're saying, Wilson?
I'm saying the under, yeah, for sure.
Would you say it was 61?
61, that's right.
Oh, man. All of LSU's games this year, you've been able to just be like, oh, take the over. But Auburn doesn't have an offense that is going to, I think, be able to score enough. So, sure. But don't take my gambling advice. That's not my forte.
No, there's a reason why I don't. I'm glad I don't have that gene, frankly. Anyway, that's where we'll wrap it up. You do what you choose. Choose as you see fit. To take this advice or not take this advice. Anyway, one way or the other, we'll be here throughout football season and beyond. So if you would, please subscribe to The Advocate. Follow us along on this journey to the finish line now in the back half of the season. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. Find this podcast wherever you can at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Just search for LSU Sports Insider, or certainly watch and follow along on our YouTube channels, the Advocate YouTube channels, and our social media accounts as well. If you want to get a hold of our LSU newsletter, please do so as well. You can sign up for that at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. It's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure as always. We will be here throughout football season. So please follow along. For Wilson Alexander and Scott Rabalais, I'm Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.